Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So last time we covered selecting columns, and we got briefly into the idea of using helper functions with select that would allow us to select columns by name, particularly this idea of using a regular expression. And we said, well, we're not going to get exactly into the regular expressions so far, but there are some basic ones like where you can just match a character string exactly, like give me everything that includes the character string time, so time. Um, there's also we can select by position, we can select ranges of values, and those are all to get access to, or really to get at the columns that we care about. And select is going to leave behind all of the columns that we don't specifically ask for. So this kind of like harkens back to our positive positional subsetting or positive subsetting, where we say, give me all of the columns that I ask for. Now, the next thing is we can use negative subsetting as well. And you remember that if we use a negative sign, that would say, do not give me these things. So give me everything else. But when we talked about doing this with in the last couple of lessons, so the atomic vectors and the non-atomic vectors, we said that we could not use the negative sign with a name, that it would give us this error that said non-numeric, like a unary operator error. And we're not allowed to use a negative sign with a name. Actually, we can probably go through and do this. Let's do library. Oh, whoops, library, NYC flights 13. Do I have this package? Yes, I do. And then flights. Let's see if I can do structure of flights. Yes, okay, so I've got the flights data set here. And if I say I want this data set, but I don't want the hour, I don't want the hour column. I could remove it. So I know that there's 19 columns. I could say, give me everything except for column 18. So flights. If I could spell flights, but I don't want column 18. That will give me everything except for, and notice, which one was it? Oh no, hour is there. Sorry, I removed the minute column. So let me do this. Would be get rid of 17. Get rid of column 17. And now we see that distance is there, minute is there, time hour is there, but the hour column is gone. Okay, so I said get rid of. I want all of the columns except I don't want column 17. But when I said, all right, and I'd like to do this, one second. Sorry about that. But I would like to do this by name. I want to say I want to remove the hour column by name, because what if the columns are reordered, or they change position, or the number is not always 17, then I get this error, invalid argument to unary operator. And so we said, okay, well, we want to figure out a way that we can remove columns by name. So I said, I don't want this column. But I don't want to rely on that column always being in that same position, because that's kind of weak code. If you just added one extra column, literally all of the other columns to the right of it would all be one number off. And that's like, I think of how many times that we've just done something like, yeah, let's just add one more column right here. It happens with CDC data, it happens with American Community Survey data, it happens all the time, where the data position will change, but a lot of times the column names won't change, or they won't change very much. You'll still have most of the exact same column name, which means that you can find it, but it's in a different position. So subsetting by position is often very dangerous. It's not going to hold up over time. But subsetting by hour, or I'm sorry, subsetting by name, you get a much better chance. Well, so the way that we do this, so library tidyverse, is we say flights and then pipe operator, so Command Shift M, select minus hour. And this will give me the 18 columns that I'm asking for, and I'm getting rid of the hour column. So if we go down here, we've got minute, we've got time underscore hour, but hour is gone. Okay, that column is gone. So this is the solution. We use the select function, and it allows us to specify the columns that we want to remove with that minus sign. Very powerful. Very, very useful here. And not only that, but you can remove entire ranges of columns as well. So right here, if I want to remove all of the dating columns, if you will, you can think about this as like, okay, well, if I need to de-identify a data set and I know that I've got a column with medical record information, or I've got a column with names, or I've got a column with phone numbers or addresses or emails, boom, right there. Use the negative sign, remove those columns, save that data set before you share it with someone else. Let's get rid of those columns. And you can specify the names of the columns rather than the positions, okay? Like we can imagine this horror story where the PI gives us the data set, and we write all of our code, we write our pipelines to de-identify the data, to remove the unique IDs based on the position. And then we have this code, we're ready to send it out. But then the PI says, oh, shoot, hold on. I didn't realize, but we had we left off some of the data or whatever, like some of these records. So here's this new updated data set. I want you to go through the process for this. You say, okay, cool. You get the new data set, you run all of your code, everything works, and you send it out. But what you didn't realize was that the PI or someone upstream in the data creation or data management process added a new column somewhere. So now all of your indices are off, and you just sent out data with PHI. Okay. Terrible, horrible thing to happen. People are going to get sued. Somebody's getting fired. Somebody potentially will go to jail. Like, don't do this. Make sure that you're selecting by the names as much as humanly possible. To make sure that you're saying, I want to keep these columns by name. I want to remove these other columns by name. Use names as much as possible. Also, you'll get warnings if you try to select a column and it's not, the name isn't matching. So that'll give you a hint. Like, oh, somebody maybe updated column names. I need to go back and check my code to make sure it's working, to make sure that I'm asking for the correct column names. So why would I want to do this other than like de-identifying? But the other thing is, if I've already used the filter command to drill down to a certain set of rows and say, okay, give me all of the females who are 36 to 55 years old, well, now I don't need to have the sex assigned at birth column, or maybe I don't need to have the age column anymore, because that I've already looked at just a subset of the data. So I'm drilling down to these rows, and then you say, okay, well, I don't need these columns of information. I don't need these columns over here because they're all the exact same for these people. So I'm just going to cut these out and only look at this subset of the data. So after I've done this filter, I just add on a command and say, okay, get rid of that date column because I don't need it anymore. I know this is January 1st, 2013, so I don't need the information to tell me what day it is anymore. Also, reordering columns. So there are times where you have to keep the whole data set, but it's just kind of unwieldy because you've got hundreds of columns or whatever, but you have to keep the whole thing. But there are some super important columns that need to be closer to the front that are just easier to see, or maybe at the very end, something like that. Or it's that like somehow or another, there are measurements, there are these instrument variables that are throughout the entire data set, but they got jumbled, they got reordered or somehow or another. And you say, okay, well, I want to make sure that all of the features related to the Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence are all related to each other. They're all just like right here. So from column here to column here, they're all together. And you need to do some organization of your columns. You can absolutely do that with the select function as long as you include the everything command. So remember, without the everything command, it's only going to give you these two columns that you ask for. But as soon as you include the everything command, it's going to move these columns to the front. And it's going to say, okay, these two columns are clearly super important. We need these all the way to the left. We need these at the very front of the data set, and then everything else comes after that. And notice it's going to preserve it's going to preserve the order. So year, month, and day stay in order. Everything else stays in the same order. We just take this column, move it to the front, this column, move it right after. So that's reordering, and then renaming function. So the select function technically can rename. However, I'm going to strongly recommend that you use the rename command because it's just easier when you go back and read your code later. So yes, use the rename command, and notice this is bold. We must save. So as before, I've mentioned this a few times. None of these dplyr functions, the filter, the arrange, the select, and the later on when we talking about mutate, group by, summarize, joins, they do not, they don't auto save your progress. You need to explicitly save the data set into a new object. Also notice here, I am saving the data set back into itself. This is usually a very, very bad idea. However, in this instance, I'm saying that it's okay. And the reason why is because of this. There is one column in this data set. So that is not written in snake case, and that is this one right here. Tail num should be 2 words because it's tail number of the flight. Notice everything else is snake case. All of these other things are snake case except for tail number. So this would be one of those instances where like, okay, I'm making a very minor change. I'm not worried about screwing up my data. So I use the new name equals old name syntax. So right here, I want the new name to be tail underscore num, and the old name was tail num without the underscore. So now I'm basically just changing the name to be snake case to match all of the other columns in the data set. So this was an error in the original data set that the name was not saved in snake case. So I'm fixing an error in the original data set. But I do have a record of it. So this is one of the other things. Anytime you make modifications to the original data set, make absolutely certain that you have code to do that, that you have code that shows what that is. So we want to make sure that we have record of the change that we have made. You can think about this as kind of like the idea of data provenance or just an audit trail, if you will, that if you make modifications to the original data set, you want a record of what you did, preferably with comments to say why you did it, so that no one can accuse you of fabricating data. You can say, okay, this is the data that I started with. This is the raw data. It is holy. It is sacred. It is separate. I'm not touching it. Also, the raw data on your computer, whatever that .csv file or .txt file, that should never be touched ever. You can pull it into R and say and do modifications and save it into a different file name, but never, ever, 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 ever overwrite the original raw data. Do not do it. Okay. I break that rule. I say do as I say, not as I do. Every once in a while, I break that rule, but you really should not ever, ever do that. So that just protect yourself. Leave the raw data exactly as it was sent to you, either via transfer or via email, or you got access to a cloud account or whatever it is. Leave that raw data exactly as it is. Don't touch it. Don't modify it. Pull it into R, and then you can start modifying the version that you have in R. Save a cleaned version as a different file name. Okay, so, and then right here, notice that I'm overriding the flights data set with itself, and I leave you a tip right here. If you do this, you cannot go back a step. This action cannot be undone. So basically, most everything else that you could do to data, you could probably undo it, because you could just go back to the original flights data set and be like, oh, well, I made this modification. I didn't like it, so I'm just going to start over. Just go back to wherever I started and then change the modification step. But here, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to overwrite what you did. Okay, and that's all on the select function that I want to talk about. Next time, we will talk about the mutate command. So see you soon.